So when I think about performance, I think about performing arts. But in a way, we are doing artsy
Mm.
things, whether it's with
Hmm.
sports, whether it's with our work, because we're being creative. And I wanted to know what performance means to you and how
Yeah.
has your perception of it actually evolved over time?
So it's interesting. I love that we're starting with this because when I ask other people when they hear the word performing or performance, like what comes up for you? And a lot of the times people are like, oh, it feels fake or inauthentic, or it's like stress or judgment. And like that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this, because the reality is we're constantly performing. So my former relationship with performing is like when you're on, you're on. As a soccer player, it's like when you're all in, you're all in, and it's happening behind the scenes too. But like you're showing up to practice, and in that time of my life too, I was showing up for other things as well, and I almost saw them as separate, and I wish I hadn't, because they're all completely intertwined. And if you're struggling in one area, it's going to impact other areas. As much as we try to compartmentalize, like we're human at the end of the day. So, in terms of my definition now and how I work with others on their definition of performing is it's it really is the basic definition is your engagement in a task or a function, the quality of your completion of a task or a function. And if you think of it that way, we are constantly performing. And the biggest mistake we can make is waiting for the big thing, because chances are by that point you're prepared or you're not. And how you show up is very much an internal reflection. So that's the relationship I've created. And people might think like, oh, that sounds like even more pressure. You're always on. But it's more of like a mindfulness practice, is again to not wait for the next thing. It's like to be present, to do the best you can. And that doesn't mean it has to be perfect. It just means you're doing everything you can. You're being intentional. And every day that might look a little different.
Right? Like every day I wake up, I'm like, why am I in a bad mood? And wake up next morning, why am I in a good mood all of a sudden?
Yeah, right.
We don't choose our emotions sometimes, just like when we perform these different things, we may do really good and then we may not do so good the
Mm.
next one. But we got to give some compassion to ourselves and not,
Yeah.
yeah, our hater. We need to be our own best friend. I always say that roommate that's in that head right there, it's like,
Hmm.
she needs to shut up and go and move out before I kick her out because you want your mind to be your best friend. I've learned that
Oh,
the hard way.
exactly. And that comes from like kind of what you were saying is being more inquisitive than judgmental. Like, why am I feeling this way? Because we can control our emotions. It's not easy, but what comes up for you, you may not have as much control of if it's in response to a situation or not getting enough sleep or whatever it may be. But what we don't realize is we tend to have more control than we realize. And even just starting that question with why am I feeling this way instead of like I shouldn't be feeling this way, or like, oh, today's gonna be horrible. That's performing right there, is choosing a different thought. Like, okay, I know I'm struggling. Like, what do I need? So that's that right there, because that leads to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And
Mhm.
it's very much a domino effect.
Right? Totally a domino effect. So we got to just change our thoughts in our story that's in our head, like
Mm.
just change it. It's okay to practice it. It's
it's
difficult
not
at
it's not
first.
easy to
It's
do.
not easy
And
to
to
do.
no, it's not. And the reason, because a lot of people say that, right? And I don't feel like everyone has the context of why, because it sounds good in theory. They're like, oh, why wouldn't I just think differently? It's not
Yeah.
easy. And the reality is, though, the science is showing that we have about 60,000 thoughts a day.
Wow.
And what happens is our thoughts impact our emotional experience,
Mhm.
right? We're prompted with something, we get some kind of stimuli, we're going to have some kind of thought about it, right? That's the way we process information. And that thought is going to trigger an emotional response, because that tells us how to act or react to it. Now, depending on what that action or reaction looks like, is going to elicit that cycle all over again. So we are constantly in that cycle, and a lot of times we're kind of along for the ride because it's not in our conscious mind. So building that relationship, like you were saying, with yourself, with your thought process, and maybe even just becoming more aware of what you're saying to yourself, what that sounds like, and how it's impacting you on a day to day or even moment to moment, is a huge shift in and of itself.
Right. Yeah, because I remember when I was the reason why I think I drank is because I had like very low confidence and I
Mm.
wanted to like numb how I felt. And I felt
Hmm.
like that alcohol would give me more confidence because I would talk so meanly to myself. I'm like, man, I would even talk to a stranger like that, or let
Yeah.
alone like my own children. Like, why am I
Hmm.
even talking to myself like that? Like, what the heck?
Mm.
Like, why? Like, we're supposed to be like cheering us on. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Oh, it's so
Yeah.
horrible. I'm like, oh, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I'd just say that.
No, it's true though. And I think like when, alcohol is a very common coping mechanism, when we don't know how to reconfigure those thoughts or they feel so invasive and we don't have other skills, it's a very common means of ineffective coping, obviously. But, we do the best we can with what we know. And I think our job is to keep trying to build that knowledge. And instead of putting ourselves down or being harsh to ourselves, like building that compassion and knowing when you don't know what you need to know, and always being willing to find out more from whether it's someone else or resources or support or whatever it might be.
Totally.